We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Unfiltered Report. My name is Ryan. Hope you're having an excellent day, night, wherever you listen to this at whatever time. This is episode 86, if I'm not mistaken. Big shout out to everyone that's made the first 85 a reality. None of this is possible without all the amazing stars of the Unfiltered Report. And it's the summer. It's what we've been waiting for. We just did a after dark a little bit ago with my guy D. Big shout out to him. Big shout out to Malik for the preview. Fadil with the most recent conversations. I know we're gonna have plenty of other stars of the Unfiltered Report coming on in the next couple of days and weeks and months. It's the World Cup. It's the summer. It's what we've been looking forward to. So, match day one in the books. We're gonna try to be on it. Like I said, 39 days in a row for the World Cup. But of course, there's so much going on in addition to the World Cup, which is what makes this summer so exciting. We've still yet to fully recap Game 5 between the Knicks and the Spurs, which was, I mean, that speaks for itself. But we're gonna recap that, preview Game 6 or Game 5, sorry. Preview Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals. The Carolina Hurricanes just went up 3-2 over the Vegas Golden Knights. Game 6 in Vegas, season on the line for the Golden Knights. We mentioned the NBA. We still haven't recapped the NBA Draft Combine, which is hard for me to believe. Not only that we haven't done that, but also the fact that the NBA Draft is less than 2 weeks away. About a week and a half, if you can believe that, actually, because I sure can't. So we're going to have plenty of NBA Draft conversations. Obviously, we mentioned the finals. We'll have a big off-season primer. We'll go through all the teams as the news comes in throughout that NBA Summer League. We got some big plans for NBA Summer League, so stay tuned for that. Going to do our best to also give some love to the NHL Draft when that rolls around as well. Baseball season's in full swing. Major League Baseball is a lot going on. We're about a month from the All-Star game in Philadelphia. Can't wait for that. That same time period will be the MLB draft. We're going to go in, preview that, recap that. All of this will be happening while the World Cup is still going on. After the World Cup, before you know it, the NFL, college football is going to be back. We've been edging this Texas Tech conversation. I promise you it's coming very shortly. But before we can really get to that deep dive, because it's going to be a lot, and before we can get to all that other stuff, what we want to get into with this particular recording is we had a college baseball regionals preview, postseason preview. Time has come and gone since then. The regionals have finished. The super regionals came and went. And we're about 8 hours and 11 minutes, give or take, here on the West Coast, away from Game 1 in Omaha of the College World Series. 64 teams down to 8. We're going to deep dive that. I'd also like to make a quick note as well. I'd like to, we mentioned that we've been, kind of postponing this Texas Tech conversation. Originally, the way it was going to be lined up was we're going to give some love to the Women's College World Series with Texas and Texas Tech. That has also come and gone. Texas, back-to-back champions, beat Texas Tech in the finals for the second year in a row. So a big shout out goes to the Longhorns. It's kind of ironic and interesting how it works where Oklahoma had their dominant stretch. I think they won 4 straight titles under their incredible manager, Patty Gasso. And then there's Gary Glasgow at Texas Tech. But again, back-to-back champions. A big shout out to the Texas Longhorns. An amazing feat for them to go back-to-back And a big shout out goes to Mike White, the softball manager, Tegan Cavan, incredible for Texas, Nigel Kennedy as well for Texas Tech, back to back years for both of them. Nigel Kennedy has since gone second overall in the AUSL, or actually before then, but the ASUL season has started. She went second overall. There's this girl out of Belmont, Maya Johnson, who went third, who had one of the most ridiculous stat lines I've ever seen in my entire life. I think she had 397 strikeouts this past season at Belmont. And then the number one pick, uh, in the ASUL draft, um, out of Tennessee. She's thrown the fastest pitch. Carlin Pickens, I believe it was a 79-mile-an-hour pitch that she threw during the tournament. So we want to give some love from here on out. Moving forward, future seasons with college softball. We mentioned the AUSO season just started. The WNBA is in full swing. The NWSL, PWHL. I want to give some love to them, over the course of these coming recordings. So we want to give them proper deep dives as well. So stay tuned for that as well. And anybody who wants to be a part of these conversations, please, if we know each other, reach out. If we don't, you can email the unfiltered report at gmail.com. We can get in contact. I'd be happy to set that up. Even if we've never met, it would be an honor and a pleasure to make that happen. So without further ado, setting the stage for these conversations, looking forward to all of that. And again, we're going to try to go 39 for 39 with the World Cup. And in addition to that, we're just going to try to make it day to day with everything else here moving forward and kind of usher in I wouldn't say a new era, but just continuing to plug away and have a blast with these. I can only speak on my own behalf, but these are the pleasure of my life. I have such a blast, and it's such an honor to be able to do this and share this, with all the wonderful stars of the Unfiltered Report. And as I always like to say, this is our thing, baby. So let's have a fucking blast. It's the coming out party of the summer. We can't wait. So much in store. So please stay tuned moving forward. And, in the event that there are, multiple episodes a day, I hope each episode gets to shine in its own respective way, as I know that they will, regardless of how many come out each day. I can't wait for all of them, all the different subjects we just mentioned, and so much more that we haven't even mentioned that probably slipped my mind and will come back to me, and I'll kick myself and say, how did I forget that? But you know what? Can't wait for it all. But here we are, late night here on the West Coast. And I wanted to be able to get this in before the College World Series, just kind of the order of operations, given that that's about to start in about 8 hours' time. So I want to go back, recap the regionals and super regionals, set the stage for the College World Series. Um, and just kind of enjoy this beautiful weekend ahead. I mean, we've got 2 World Cup matches on Friday. We've got 4 on Saturday, 4 on Sunday. On top of that, we've got the NBA Finals, the NHL Finals, College World Series, MLB baseball, WNBA, AUS. You go down the list. I mean, we could be here for hours talking about how much is going on in the sporting world, and I just can't wait to get into all of it. So without further ado, we're gonna go regional by regional. We'll go in chronological order of each regional from the 1 seed on down to 16, and then we'll pick it up. It might go a little bit all over the place as some of these conversations tend to do, but I will try my best to do this conversation justice. And as we always like to say, it's not the only time that we're going to talk about it. So whatever we don't discuss today will be added in future discussions, obviously throughout the College World Series. And then we mentioned the MLB draft coming up in about a month. And a lot of the players that we mentioned will be a big focus of our MLB draft coverage. not only this year, but moving forward, 2027, 2028. And that hasn't even accounted for the high school prospects that we have yet to talk about for uh, the upcoming MLB draft. And we still have to do our MLB farm system deep dive, which I've not forgotten. And we'll get to that as well in very short order. But we're going to start things off with the Los Angeles Regional, which really should be the Westwood Regional. Number one seed UCLA. We mentioned in our preview that it wasn't really much controversy that they got the number one seed. You weren't going to get many complaints from me or anybody else about that particular decision. We did mention in our preview, we came in and said, felt like it was going to be a collision course between Georgia Tech and Georgia, and the winner of that and that on that side of the bracket, on that 2-3 side of the bracket in Omaha, and the winner of that would be my favorite to win the entire tournament, the entire College World Series. We'll get to that. We'll get to Georgia Tech and Georgia, but we did mention that, okay, UCLA, you know, very rewarding in getting the one seed. I didn't have them as my favorite, but they were well deserved in being the number one overall seed, given the success that they had in the regular season and in the Big Ten tournament as well. I would be lying to you if I said that I anticipated UCLA going out not only as early as they did in the regional, but in the manner in which they did. Game one rolls around. They lose to St. Mary's 3-2. Jacob Johnson hits two solo homers, including one in the top of the ninth, which put them on top. They got an incredible start from their starting pitcher that day, their best pitcher on the season, John Demozonio. He went a solid 7 innings on that Friday afternoon. 7 innings, 5 hits, 202 walks, 6 Ks through 105 pitches. So you're looking at that St. Mary's off the bat, huge upset. First time in the history of the regional format, which is pretty much as long as I've been alive, that the number one overall seed lost the opening match of the college baseball postseason. And no better way for that to happen than this year with St. Mary's, with everything else going on in college sports. We mentioned it last night, with my guy D. And, again, shout out to my boy D. Love you, brother. And, kind of mentioned this Ryan McGee article on ESPN where, if you haven't read it, anyone that hears this, you can go read it on ESPN. I thought it was a great read. As much shit as we give ESPN, sometimes you have to give credit where it's due. I thought it was a great article, and he basically went in, and I'm not these are not his exact words, but again, just paraphrasing, it was basically, hey, don't fuck with college baseball, for all the shit going on in college sports, which I promise we're going to get to, which goes much deeper than college sports. And they basically said, hey, you know what, the college baseball postseason is baseball, it's sport at its purest form, and I know he's not the only one that feels that way. There are plenty of other articles out there, and I would echo that same sentiment. I think the college baseball postseason, in many ways, March Madness gets all the love and the publicity, but I think college baseball is, in many ways, I think it's one of the best postseasons in all of sports at any level. You get everything. You get upsets. It's a great reminder. Everybody talks about March Madness, and the best teams don't always win. The same rings true with college baseball. The best team doesn't always win. And I think that, but you know what? Part of that too is that we talk a lot of times on here, and we're going to continue to do it, where we want to give love to the quote unquote smaller schools, but when it comes to college baseball, I mean, these are powerhouse schools. A lot of these schools that we're going to mention, or even if they're not powerhouse programs historically, the rendition that they've trotted out this year, for example, is a really good ball club with really good baseball players. And it doesn't really matter the name on the front of their jersey. These are really good teams. And so St. Mary's comes in into this regional and shocks the college baseball world in many ways with a 3-2 victory over UCLA. In the other game in that regional, Cal Poly beats Virginia Tech 6-2, which sets up the winners bracket matchup between Cal Poly and St. Mary's, and then the losers bracket loser gets eliminated matchup between UCLA and Virginia Tech. UCLA ends up winning that game 6-5 in dramatic fashion. Uh, they really clawed their way to that victory 6-5. Virginia Tech gets knocked out. Cal Poly ends up smoking St. Mary's 14-1 on Saturday, which we leads us to Sunday, where Sunday we get a rematch between St. Mary's and UCLA. And you think, well, hey, St. Mary's beat them once. Are they going to beat them again? And lo and behold, St. Mary's in extra innings in the 10th inning, they go in, they beat UCLA again, knock out the number one overall seed, UCLA Bruins. A huge shout out goes to St. Mary's for winning those two games. And then the funny part of how this thing works is that St. Mary's goes in later that day on Sunday and they lose 5-2 to Cal Poly, and St. Mary's gets knocked out that same day. So you got Cal Poly, Big West, always got no problem spreading some Big West propaganda. Cal Poly goes in there into that field. Shout out to their manager, Larry Lee. His son Brooks plays for the Twins. Played at Cal Poly a couple of years ago. Cal Poly's got some pretty good players. That definitely deserve some love. They had the co-Big West Player of the Year on their baseball team, and catcher Ryan Taman, which sets up a conversation that I've been wanting to have since we had our preview. I mentioned that it was kind of, in many ways, the year of the catcher. We'll continue, we mentioned Georgia Tech. You can't mention either of those teams without their catchers, Vaughn Lackey and Daniel Jackson. But, we're going to continue to talk. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of myself because a lot of these guys we're going to mention will be mentioned in the rest of this episode. But I mean, just off the top of my head, and I mean, it feels like half of these guys are in Omaha, ironically, outside of Ryan Taman, which not to get ahead of ourselves again, but I mean, you go down the list, whether it's Gavin Kelly at West Virginia, who's got a really good shot to be a top 5, top 3, maybe even a number 1 overall draft pick next year. If things shake out for him next year the way that they could, he'll definitely be in that top 5, top 10 conversation heading into the next year cycle. Jimmy Janicki at Troy, Carson Tinney at Texas, Dayton LaChance at Oklahoma, who first 31 games of the season didn't hit a home run. And now, I mean, it feels like he's hitting a home run almost every other game, it feels like. And I mean, we'll get to Dayton LaChance and his statistical averages in a little bit, and we'll highlight just how incredible it is that he didn't hit a single home run for 31 games. And then you hear his stat line as it stands today. But, again, big shout out to Cal Poly, Ryan Taman, co-Big West Player of the Year, 357 batting average on the year, 18 homers, 57 RBIs. Just a really good season for him. And then on the mound, Carson Turnquist, he pitched really well against Virginia Tech in that regional. I mean, he's an not old fashioned, but he's just a big right hander. He really throws. He's got like a 2-3 pitch, mix at max. He's just gonna throw the heater. And we'll get to the West Virginia conversation later. Again, not to get ahead of ourselves. But Carson Turnquist, you know, interesting, long-term prospect, maybe, someone to keep an eye on, maybe heading into next year, as well. So a big shout out goes to Cal Poly for making out of that regional. And how about the fact that Cal Poly goes into that regional, not only wins the regional, but they don't have to play UCLA, with St. Mary's taking care of UCLA twice. Cal Poly never has to play UCLA. UCLA gets knocked out. Cal Poly beats St. Mary's twice, and Cal Poly wins that regional. So again, Big West propaganda. We're never going to get enough of that. So then we move on to the Atlanta Regional, Georgia Tech. I've been waiting to have this conversation for a long time. Didn't know when it was going to happen. Happens to be right now at the crack of dawn. Not even dawn, whatever hour it is. Georgia Tech, man. I stand by what I said before the tournament, and Georgia Tech comes in Friday against UIC and smacks the doors off of them, 22-5. And I know you're thinking now, 1 against 4, 22-5. They set the tone. Okay. Oklahoma and the Citadel, they don't conclude their first game until Saturday. Oklahoma beats the Citadel. We mentioned the Citadel stole a bid from Mercer. Mercer was a team we came on here. We said Mercer should have made the tournament. The Citadel ends up making it. Oklahoma beats the Citadel. And we mentioned Mercer beat Georgia Tech earlier in the year. Um, so Oklahoma goes in, beats the Citadel. So then the Citadel plays UIC. That goes 10 innings. The Citadel ends up coming out on top 9-8. And then on the winner's bracket side of things, it's Georgia Tech against Oklahoma. Georgia Tech goes in, beats Oklahoma 9-3. So at this point, at no point in either Friday or Saturday has there been any doubt in my mind that Georgia Tech is on a collision course with Georgia in the College World Series. I'm sticking by that. I'm putting my foot down. I'm feeling good. I say, hey, you know what? I mean, I'm not that I went out on a limb necessarily in saying Georgia Tech, but I mean that lineup's incredible, and I still stand by that. You go down the list: Fawn Lackey, Jaron Advincula, Drew Burris, Carson Kersey. I mean, you go down the list. It's just a really good team. They beat Oklahoma. So let me come in Sunday. Oklahoma beats the Citadel 15-5. And then that's when things get really, really wonky because then you move into this elimination game for Oklahoma. And like I mentioned, at no point am I considering the possibility of anything other than Georgia Tech coming out of this regional. We come in Sunday after again Oklahoma beats the Citadel 15-5. We come in here and here we are. Georgia Tech scores 2 runs in the first inning. Drew Burris hits a home run. Oklahoma ties it up in the bottom of the second. It's 2-2. Georgia Tech scores 5 runs in the third. So they go up 7-2. They tack on another run in the top of the fourth, and they go up 8-2. And then in the span of about 19 pitches or so, Oklahoma puts up an 8 spot in the bottom of the fourth. And the next thing you know, it's 9-8. Or sorry, 10-8 Oklahoma in the snap of a finger. Now all of a sudden it's game on. Oklahoma holds Georgia Tech the rest of the way, blanks them. They tack on another run in the seventh, 4 in the eighth. Oklahoma ends up coming out on top 15-8 and setting up a winner take all game 7 in the Atlanta Regional Monday, June 1st, which I mentioned. We wanted to come in here on June 1st, and the original plan was we were going to come in here, we were going to recap the regional, we were going to give some love to the Women's College World Series, and we were going to set up a conversation about Brendan Sorsby. One thing led to another, went down the rabbit hole. A lot of shit happened from June 1st until now, and just added to that deep dive episode. And, lost in the sauce, we didn't even really get to preview the Super Regional or recap the regional when it happened, but we're doing it now. So June 1st rolls around. Feels like it was forever ago, but it wasn't that long ago. And, Monday morning, Georgia Tech, Oklahoma. We mentioned Dayton LaChance. Dayton LaChance hits a homer in the bottom of the first, puts Oklahoma up 2-0. They tack on another run. Darren Harris hits an RBI single. They go up 3-0. Things are getting a little nervous for Georgia Tech early on. But then in the top of the third, Drew Burris, who's got a really good shot at being a top 10 pick in about a month, hits a two-run homer. Then in the top of the fifth, they go back to back at the bottom of their lineup. And next thing you know, they're up 4-3. Top of the sixth, they tack on another couple of runs, 3 runs to be exact. They go up 7-3. Meanwhile, a big shout out goes to my guy at Georgia Tech out of the bullpen. This dude, I mean, I give him a ton of credit. I mean, he was absolutely, he gave every last ounce of what his arm had out of the bullpen. Who am I referring to? Of course, I'm referring to Mason Patil, the is a senior year graduate player. Majority of the years coming out of the bullpen. Really good year out of the bullpen, mind you. And he came in this game and was absolutely money. Gave them his longest outing of the entire season. I think it was the longest outing of his career as well. He goes 6 and a third out of the bullpen, throws 100 pitches, only gives up 2 runs, which came towards the end of his outing, kept Georgia Tech in the game, gave them a chance to win it. We'll get to the end of this game and maybe the Monday morning quarterback aspect of it. But regardless of that, I have a ton of respect for a guy like Mason Patil. With college baseball too, one of the things I love about college baseball is that, these guys, that they actually go out there, that, they go deep into games, the starters. There are a lot of cases, even in some of these games that we're going to talk about later, where you have starters throwing 120 something pitches. I'll never forget the Quinn Matthews start when he was at Stanford a couple of years ago, when he threw, I think it was 150 something pitches. And I'm hoping Quinn Matthews gets a shot in the big leagues pretty soon too. He's been kind of hanging around in the minor leagues. I think he's going to get a shot sooner or later. It's a name to keep an eye on when we do our farm system deep dive. But I give a big shout out to Mason Patil. Gave everything that he had. That changeup that he was throwing, I mean, I give him a ton of credit. Kept him in the game, gave him a chance. And Oklahoma tacks on 2 runs in the seventh. So that 7-3 lead ends up becoming 7-5. The eighth inning rolls around. Oklahoma gets another run, 7-6. Georgia Tech decides to go to their horse at the end in the bottom of the ninth, up 7-6. They turn to their guy Tate McKee, who again we mentioned Yamamoto earlier tonight with my guy D. People aren't doing that, but I give a lot of these college baseball guys credit. Some of these guys will come out, they'll pitch, they'll start on Friday, and then they'll come in on Monday, and they'll come in relief. It's happened throughout the years, and this is only the latest example. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, Tate McKee comes out there. Honestly, you could tell when he came out there that he didn't have his best stuff from the jump. He really battled to get out of that ninth inning without blowing it in the ninth completely, but they lose the 1-run lead. And all of a sudden, you go into extra innings at 7-7. And keep in mind, this whole time that this game's going on, I mean, it's a great game. It's close, but it hasn't crossed my mind that Georgia Tech's really going to lose. I feel like, you know what, that until Oklahoma tied it up in the ninth, they went to the top of the 10th. And once Oklahoma got out of the top of the 10th without giving up any runs, that was the first time the entire weekend, and I thought, okay, you know what, Georgia Tech might not make it out of here. At no point did I lose faith in Georgia Tech. I believed that they were going to make it out of this regional. But then Tate McKee comes out again in the bottom of the 10th, which again, we can get into this Monday morning quarterback thing. But as it so happens to be, they got the Dayton talkies at the plate for Oklahoma. They're talking about his mom at the game. They put his mom on camera, and I mean, maybe a half a second later after they panned to his mom, Tate McKee gets into his windup, and Dayton Taki, I mean, as soon as it went off the bat, I mean, it was over. You know, dead eye right over the batter's eye, deep center field. You could see Drew Burress in center field. You could see his soul leave his body as he watches the ball that he knows is going over the fence. Jared Vincula falls on the infield, just collapse. None of these guys could believe that they lost. Um, I couldn't believe that they lost. But Oklahoma, credit to them. They go in, backs against the wall, having to win not only once, but twice, back to back days against Georgia Tech. And again, we mentioned they didn't finish their game on set against the Citadel the first time until Saturday. So they played a lot of condensed baseball in one weekend. They went out there, they got it done. Big credit to Oklahoma. And it's, you know what? It's the beauty of the college baseball postseason that things like this can happen. Obviously, Oklahoma is not some Cinderella story. I mean, it's Oklahoma freaking Homa, but still an incredible feat for Oklahoma to go into that regional, come out victorious the way that they did. A big shout out goes to their manager Skip Johnson. They really, they went into that regional. They didn't have a ton of momentum maybe heading into it. But a credit to them, when you get to the postseason, it's a new season. And, as we always like to say, look, in any sport, the best team doesn't always win, whether it's college sports, professional sports, any sport that has a postseason. More often than not, sometimes the best team does win, but it doesn't always happen. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Um, and I stand by this, regardless of the outcome. I still think Georgia Tech to me, I think them and Georgia are the two best teams all year. I stand by that, even though Georgia Tech's not in Omaha and they got knocked out in a regional. That's just how things go sometimes in sports. That's just how it goes. It takes nothing away from the talent on that team. Um, I have nothing but good things to say about that Georgia Tech team. Um, they really, even though they didn't make it out of that regional that entire weekend, they did nothing but cement my opinions, even though they didn't make it out of that regional, especially that lineup. I mean, they got a ton of big leaguers just in that lineup alone. We mentioned the Monday morning quarterback situation. I mean, with Mason Patil, you could tell that he was starting to fade towards the end of his outing, and they probably could have taken him out a little bit earlier. I will say I did actually like the fact that they left him in there. So I actually don't disagree with that decision. I probably would have done the same thing, to be honest with you. I would have just, I think, that's not the reason that they lost the game. Uh, their manager at Georgia Tech, he's gonna do great things over there. Um, I have no doubt about that. Um, that they're really gonna, that they're really gonna do great things. So yeah, James Ramsey at Georgia Tech, I give him a lot of credit. You know, uh, first year at the helm, hard to believe that. I mean, you couldn't build a better team on paper in any year of your managerial career, but for that to be the first team that you're the head manager of. I mean, I would have nothing. I would have no doubts that Georgia Tech's going to be back with this guy at the helm. They'll make it to Omaha some point in the near future. Obviously, it's impossible to predict, but I think the sky's the limit moving forward for Georgia Tech. Even though they're going to lose a large chunk of these guys to the major league draft. And again, going back to Von Lackey too at the catcher position, I have nothing but good things to say about the guy. I think to me, he's a slam dunk top two, top three pick in a draft, top five at the worst. Um, I think you're getting one of the best catchers in Major League Baseball in a short period of time. if things kind of play out the way that they can. I mean, this dude's just an incredible athlete. I mean, even in that game that they lost on Monday, he had a play where Oklahoma, I forget, I think it might have been my guy, Mr. Harris, dropped down a bunt, and I mean, I mean, there's such a simple, such a hard play made it look like it was a routine play where he caught it off the hop, barehanded it, and threw him out like this with the snap of a finger. Made it look breathtakingly easy. Um, I mean, he's just an incredible athlete. He can really swing the bat too. I got nothing but good things to say about him and the rest of Georgia Tech. Again, James Ramsey. I think they're going to be around. Again, I give a big shout out to Mason Patel for the way that he grinded through that outing, 6 1/3 out of the bullpen, gave them everything that he had in order to keep them in that game and give them a chance. Um, but again, credit to Oklahoma. They went in and they walked it off. And you know, again, sometimes you just got to tip your cap. That's just how sports go sometimes. So two regionals down. Now we go to the Georgia side of the equation. We go to the Athens regional. In the Athens regional, Liberty and Boston College. Liberty's got a starter who we'll talk about, Mr. Blair, who will be part of our MLB draft coverage. Liberty beats Boston College 4-3. Georgia smacks Long Island 18-2. Boston College eliminates Long Island 8-4. Georgia comes in, beats Liberty 6-2. And then Liberty beats Boston College. And then Georgia beats Liberty. To me, this regional was pretty cut and dry. There really wasn't much that went off script compared to the Atlanta regional, where I mean we spent a lot of time talking about that just now. In the Athens regional, things went pretty much according to script. Um, there was the one, I mean, I wouldn't call it a controversy, but there was the instance with Trey Phelps where Trey Phelps hits a huge homer and, emotions, he's jacked up. They just took the lead and then he got tossed, which I don't understand how and why he got tossed. Ended up getting suspended for the first game, for the next game that they played, which we'll get to that. Um, but Trey Phelps is an outstanding player. If anyone hasn't seen the video, go in and watch the Trey Phelps ejection and see if that, to me, it was arguably the worst ejection I've ever seen in any sport. I mean, I don't understand what the thought process was there. Um, I mean, it's the college baseball postseason. He's fired up. What do you expect him to do? Um, but I give a lot of credit. Again, Trey Phelps. It's a great player. Daniel Jackson, we mentioned him. I mean, it goes without saying, 31 homers, 86 RBIs, 26 stolen bases as a catcher. We mentioned Fawn Lackey. For whatever reason, Daniel Jackson's not as high up on draft boards. I think he's magically moved up on some of these media, rankings. I don't really pay attention to media rankings that much, to be honest with you. But Daniel Jackson to me is definitely a guy. I do keep tabs a little bit on media rankings. That's a little bit of a lie, but I guess that the caveat is I don't put I put a little bit of stock into it, but I try to separate all that. But that's a separate conversation. But again, Daniel Jackson's an incredible player. Wes Johnson, the manager. I got nothing but love and respect for that dude. We mentioned James Ramsey on the flip side of the coin. You know, Wes Johnson, what he's been able to do in Athens. Uh, you know, and not, again, tip of the cap to them. And what's fascinating to me is that Wes Johnson's made his living, made his chops with the way that he's able to develop pitchers. But this Georgia lineup is a murderer's row. And so, yeah, that regional to me was pretty cut and dry. So then we move on to the Auburn regional. So we mentioned earlier St. Mary's going in and beating UCLA. Well, Milwaukee goes in and beats Auburn 13-8. And you're thinking, wow, okay, good for Milwaukee. We mentioned last year that Little Rock gave LSU, my beloved Tigers, uh, everything that they could handle in that Baton Rouge regional last year. And Milwaukee gave everything that they had to Auburn. We mentioned NC State, their manager, Elliott Avent. They should thank him for getting into the tournament, for announcing that he was going to retire. Um, they didn't last very long. They went 0-2 in the tournament. They lost to UCF, and then Auburn knocked them out. Milwaukee beat UCF in the winners bracket side of things, and then Auburn beat UCF, which set up a elimination game for Auburn, where Auburn had to beat Milwaukee twice in order to move on to the super regionals, similar to what we mentioned last year with Little Rock. We had mentioned St. Mary's beat UCLA, but Cal Poly came out victorious. In this instance, Auburn goes in and beats Milwaukee twice. Auburn makes it out of the Auburn regional. But again, we mentioned Milwaukee was a team that finished the regular season 6 games under 500. And we mentioned that, sometimes in college sports and just sports in general, like, the way that these conference tournaments work, the best teams from these conferences don't always make it. I always go back to that St. Peter's team in college basketball. Like, they weren't good. They had just a couple of good weeks. This Milwaukee team had a really good, you know, they had a good week in their conference tournament. They got off to a great start. Credit to them. They gave Auburn all they could handle. A big tip of the cap goes to them. I stand by my point, but again, I give them a lot of credit for like we talked about with Little Rock making it hard on Auburn, but Auburn makes it out of that regional. We mentioned Auburn's a team that's got a lot of young talent that if they're able to keep that team together, they'll be right back next year. Which again, not to get ahead of ourselves, but then we move on to the Chapel Hill regional. This regional, I had said, I thought East Carolina might come out of there. North Carolina ends up, which I regret because I did really like this North Carolina squad, which had nothing to do with that. I just, you have to pick a couple of upsets here and there. Um, but credit to North Carolina. I mean, they when we talk about the MLB draft, this Caden Glauber kid, the freshman, if you haven't watched him pitch, you should get familiarized with him in 2 years in 2028. Assuming that he continues on the trajectory that I believe he's on, he'll be a top draft pick in 2 years, and he'll be a Friday night starter very shortly. He's a great talent. But I give a lot of credit to Steve Forbes and North Carolina. They're one of two teams in the last 3 years. We'll get to the other team later that's made it to the super regionals in 3 consecutive years. They've been an incredibly consistent program for many years, even before Steve Forbes. But he's done a really good job in his tenure there. I give a lot of credit to them. East Carolina did end up. I will say East Carolina and Tennessee played one of the better games of the regionals. That game went to 14 innings. East Carolina comes out victorious. North Carolina blanked VCU and then Saturday VCU goes in and knocks out Tennessee, and then North Carolina beat East Carolina. East Carolina wiped the floor with VCU, but then North Carolina took care of business in the game six, if you will. Took care of East Carolina 9-3, and they moved on to the super regionals and that regional. North Carolina's got a couple of guys even this year. Maybe to look forward to in a draft. They're not going to be guys that go in the top 10, 15 picks, but they've got some future guys that are going to have a shot. They'll get drafted in the first couple rounds, probably the first 2, 3 rounds. and they're gonna have shots in the minor leagues to kind of work their way up, and we'll get to that. But North Carolina moves on to the super regional there. Then we move on to the Austin regional. This was one of the ones I was really looking forward to. I mentioned in the preview that outside of Georgia and Georgia Tech, I thought Texas had as good a shot as anybody to win the whole thing. But they were going to have to get through UC Santa Barbara. Credit to Santa Barbara, they gave them a good fight. Santa Barbara ends up losing game one to Tarleton State. Meanwhile, Texas smacked the dog crap out of Holy Cross. We mentioned Carson Tinney earlier. Um, you can't talk about Texas without talking about Dylan Volantis as well. You also cannot talk about Texas without mentioning arguably one of, if not the best freshman in the entire country. And again, we mentioned Caden Glauber and someone to look out for in 2 years. Anthony Pack Jr. is definitely somebody that I would keep an eye on for the people at home. He's an incredible player, incredible talent. Um, you go up and down that team. Again, just a really good ball club. Jim Schlossnagle, the manager's done the Texas roulette. It was at TCU, A&M, went to Texas. They hate him at A&M, obviously. But you know what? Credit to Jim Schlossnagle. He continues to win wherever he goes. This is no different. But again, credit to Santa Barbara, even though they lost that opening match. They came back. Jackson Flora, they saved him for Saturday, which I don't fault them for that. But Jackson Flora did some things to Holy Cross that I mean probably couldn't have aired on television. And we mentioned Von Lackey and all these guys. Jackson Flora to me is a slam dunk to be a top 5 pick. Um, I'd be shocked if he's not the first pitcher off the board in a month, regardless of college or high school. I'd be shocked if anybody goes above him. He's a great talent, and I can't wait to see what he's able to do in the minor leagues in short order. But Texas ends up withstanding UC Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara beats Holy Cross. Texas smacks the dog crap out of Tarleton State. Santa Barbara gets their revenge against Tarleton State, which sets up Game 6 against Texas. Texas wins 6-4. Texas moves on to the Super Regionals. Then we move on to the Tuscaloosa Regional. We had mentioned that maybe Oklahoma State could make it out of this regional. I mentioned Justin LeBron. I kind of, we're not into player comparisons, but maybe just a similar trend of how it might play out, where a guy like Braden Montgomery at Texas A&M a couple years ago, maybe had a down year in his final year, and maybe before that season he would have been the number 1 pick, or if not, probably top 5. He ends up going 17th. Braden Montgomery, ironically, gets called up by the White Sox the other day, hits a walk-off homer in his major league debut. Shout out to Braden Montgomery. And then Justin LeBron, I feel similarly, even though they're nothing alike as players. They don't even play the same position, but just in terms of, hey, maybe Justin LeBron didn't have the best season, but he turned it up in the regional, and he went yard a couple of times, and credit to Alabama. They beat Alabama State 21-3. They scored 3 touchdowns on them. Oklahoma State actually ended up losing game 1 to South Carolina upstate. So then Oklahoma State's in the losers bracket. They knocked out Alabama State 8-7. Alabama beat South Carolina upstate. Then Oklahoma State comes back, knocks out South Carolina upstate. But then Alabama in game 6 in 11 innings comes out victorious against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, credit to them, even though they dropped the first game, they battled, they made it a regional, but credit to the Tide, Crimson Tide, Roll Tide, fuck the Tide. But you know what? Credit to them. They make it out of that regional, and I'm really excited to see what happens with Justin LeBron in the draft. Moving on to the Gainesville regional, the number 8 seed Florida Gators. We came in here, and we said, "Hey, Troy, look out for Troy. We whiffed on East Carolina, but credit to Troy. Uh, one of the last 4 teams in from the selection committee, they actually dropped their first game to Miami, 10-5. Florida played a really good opening game against Ryder. Ryder gave them everything that they could handle in that first game. A similar thing with these 4 seeds. Really gave Florida all they could handle. But then Ryder has to drop into the losers bracket against Troy. Troy beats them 15-7. Then Florida and Miami played a football game where Florida beat them 22-10. They went for 2. They got the 2-point conversion. Miami could only muster a field goal and a touchdown with an extra point. But credit to Florida for that 22-10 victory. Then Troy goes in after losing to Miami. They beat Miami on Sunday 9-6. And then Troy, in a must win to set up a game 7 against Florida, beats Florida 16-11. And then they go in and beat the Gators 10-2 on Monday night in Gainesville. I got nothing but respect for this Troy squad. I mentioned Jimmy Chanakey. You go up and down the list of that team. Incredibly talented team. I couldn't believe they were one of the last 4 teams in, but they got their shot. We mentioned a team like Mercer. Mercer didn't get a shot, and it's a shame because I feel like Mercer could have done something similar in an alternate universe. But credit to Troy, they got their shot. They got their advantage. They took advantage of their opportunity. I misspoke there. And Troy moves on to the Super Regionals, knocking out the Florida Gators. Having lost their opening game, they go in, they win 4 straight, including 2 games on Sunday. Credit to the Troy Trojans for going in and doing damage. And we're going to continue to talk about Troy in a little bit. But moving on to the Hattiesburg Regional, the number 9 seed. We mentioned Little Rock last year gave LSU all that they could handle. And you know what? 4th seed again, Little Rock. They come in a year later after giving everything that LSU could handle, and they set the tone. They beat Southern Miss 7-4. We came in, and in this regional, we picked Jacksonville State to come out of this regional. Jacksonville State beats Virginia 15-7. Virginia goes in on Saturday and knocks out Southern Miss, the number 9 national seed. So 2 and done for Southern Miss. Disappointing weekend for them. Little Rock goes in, beats Jacksonville State in the winners bracket. They go 2-0, 1 win away from a super regional. Jacksonville State goes in, beats Virginia again, knocks them out. And then Little Rock in game 6 beats Jacksonville State a second time. A big shout out goes to their manager, Mr. Curry. Look, Little Rock almost did it last year. LSU barely escaped. LSU wins the title. Little Rock comes back a year later and they actually win this regional. They move on to the Super Regional against Troy, which we'll get to that later. But a remarkable accomplishment. And then on the subject of 4 seeds, I mean, you want to talk about 4 seeds. St. John's and the Tallahassee Regional. St. John's is not, maybe it's not Little Rock. It's not St. Mary's in Milwaukee in that aspect. But St. John's is still a 4 seed. St. John's goes in, beats Florida State game 1. We had mentioned maybe Coastal Carolina could come out of this regional. They made it to the championship game last year. They lose to Northern Illinois in game 1. And then Florida State knocks them out in the losers bracket. St. John's puts up 21 runs in the winners bracket on Northern Illinois. Florida State knocks out Northern Illinois in 10 innings. And then because of weather and whatnot, St. John's and Florida State don't play game 6 until Monday, early in the day. And St. John's beats them 5-4. And Florida State goes bye-bye. And we've got 2 4 seeds in the last however many minutes of conversation moving on to the Super Regionals. A big credit to St. John's for making out of that regional. We go to the Eugene Regional. We mentioned that this was going to be a Pac-12 reunion with Oregon, Oregon State, and Wazoo, a little Pac-12 After Dark baseball edition. Uh, I thought Oregon State really got shafted on the seed line. They probably had a pretty good argument to host a regional. And instead, they had to be a two seed, and on top of that, go and play their biggest rival in Eugene. Wazoo goes in, beats them 3-2. Wazoo complete game. That was a really great baseball game. Oregon goes in, smacks Yale 14-2. Oregon State in the losers bracket beats Yale. Oregon blanks Wazoo. Oregon State gets their revenge against Wazoo 10-1 on Sunday. But then the Beavers get outdone by the Ducks, and Oregon knocks them out. Oregon moves on to the Super Regionals. Um, Oregon's got some really good talent as well. As far as the draft is concerned, they've got a starter that I would definitely keep an eye on moving forward for future drafts. Um, Definitely a great talent, in my opinion. You might be wondering, well, who is this guy referring to? Well, that would be Will Sanford. Will Sanford, 126 strikeouts on the season. Only a sophomore. He's going to come back next year for another college season. I think with the season that can build on his sophomore campaign, he could be a first rounder next year in 2027. Um, but again, credit to Oregon for making it out of that regional, especially in the manner in which they did. So a big shout out goes to them. Then we're going to move on here to the number 12 seed, College Station Regional, Texas A&M. We mentioned that this was going to be one of the better regionals to watch with Texas State, USC, A&M as three teams to watch, and then the four seed Lamar. Um, so look, give a lot of love where it's due, and a big shout out goes to this regional. This was one of the more exciting regionals to watch, in my opinion. Um, I was looking forward to seeing how Mason Edwards was going to do in this regional. Someone who probably could be, drafted in the 20s and 30s overall in a draft. A&M, always one of the toughest places to play, regardless of the sport. But A&M goes in game one, beats Lamar 7-5, and then USC loses to Texas State 5-4. USC in the losers bracket knocks out Lamar 19-6. A&M destroys Texas State. Sunday rolls around. USC beats Texas State 15-4, setting up a game six against A&M. USC wins 14-3. And then USC comes in on Monday night, knocks out the Aggies, coming all the way back, similar to what we mentioned with Troy, winning four in a row, two on Sunday, another one on Monday, setting up a super regional between them and North Carolina, which we're going to get to that. But a big credit to the Trojans. The Trojans were a team for the majority of the regular season. I thought had a pretty good shot at hosting. They end up falling on the two line. It's a tough break for A&M. A&M gets one of the tougher two seeds in the tournament. That's just how these brackets shake out sometimes. A&M's going to be back. In future tournaments, the SEC. We'll get to the SEC as well. But A&M's not going anywhere. They're going to be around. But USC, after many years of maybe lingering in the shadows and maybe not having the level of success that they probably could and should. A credit to the Trojans. They go in, they advance to the Super Regionals. The Lincoln Regional. We mentioned this. We mentioned that Nebraska kind of got shafted a little bit in this draw, that they got probably the toughest draw of any team, just regarding who they had to face, either Ole Miss or Arizona State. It ends up being Ole Miss Again, one of the best games of the tournament. Ole Miss and Arizona State goes 14 innings. Landon Harrison's going to be a top three, top five, could be the number one pick in next year's draft in 2027. New Contreras is an interesting player to keep an eye on for this year's draft. Probably won't go round one, maybe not even round two, round three, but he's a guy wherever he gets drafted, I'd keep an eye on him. He can really swing the bat. But Ole Miss goes in, wins in 14 innings, 7-6. Nebraska takes care of South Dakota State. Arizona State, two touchdowns and a field goal, blank South Dakota State 17-0. Ole Miss goes in the winners bracket, beats Nebraska 6-3, and then Arizona State knocks out Nebraska 11-8. And then Ole Miss goes in the champ against Arizona State and beats them again in another close game, 5-4. This was one of the more competitive regionals of the entire regional weekend. Ole Miss and Arizona State played two incredible games. In many ways, I wish they could have played a best of seven. Um, it's a tough break for Nebraska. Their first time making it to the tournament and hosting a regional in such a long, really. I mean, in my lifetime, first time that they've really had any sort of national relevance like that. At least on a baseball diamond. But they got a really tough draw with Ole Miss and Arizona State. Wasn't sure which one of those two was going to come out victorious, but it ends up being the Ole Miss Rebels that move on to the Super Regionals. Their biggest rivals, Mississippi State. We mentioned them. Maybe could have been Arkansas in the spot hosting a regional, but instead it's Mississippi State. Just kind of how the cookie crumbles with the committee. Mississippi State goes in, hosts the Starkville Regional as the 14 overall national seed. And credit where it's due. They took care of business. They ran through the Starkville Regional. Clean sweep for them. They beat Lipscomb 10-1, Cincinnati 10-5. They beat Louisiana 19-5 to move on to the Super Regionals. Didn't really face any adversity in this. I thought not only did Mississippi State get a generous gift from the committee in being a number one seed, I thought they got a pretty generous draw. I liked Louisiana Lafayette squad, but not to the point where I felt like Mississippi State was going to really face any tremendous adversity. That's a tough place to play baseball as well. Starkville in general is a tough place to play, regardless of the sport, especially football and baseball. So credit where it's due to Mississippi State. They move on really without any controversy, which sets up the Lawrence Regional. We mentioned Nebraska. Kansas, we mentioned in the preview. There was a good article from Jeff Paston on ESPN for those of you who want to read that and don't want to listen to me yap and yammer. Kansas built a team basically entirely of JUCO guys. One of my favorite players to watch in the entire country this season has been Tyson LeBlanc. I think to me, I don't know where he's going to end up again in the draft. Not to continually connect it to the draft, but it's just the way my brain works is always it's always thinking about multiple things at once. And so I think Tyson LeBlanc's a guy to keep an eye on for the MLB conversations to come. But Kansas, look, I thought Arkansas should have been a one, could have been a one. We mentioned they've had a tortured history, especially in recent years. Never won a College World Series. They've come agonizingly close. No closer than that Oregon State final that they played a couple of years back. Even last year against LSU. I mentioned when we do our MLB farm system deep dive, their shortstop last year, Wahiva Alois, one of my favorite players last year, one of my favorite players currently in the minor leagues. But as far as this year's rendition, I thought, Arkansas, look, every year, they always know how to pitch. Their catcher this year, Ryder Helfrich, is going to be a first round pick, most likely. if he's not the best defensive catcher heading into the draft, he's in the top 2 or 3. He can, it goes without saying he calls his own games already. I think whatever he gives you at the plate is a bonus, but I think he'll have a chance to move up the minor leagues just because of his ability behind the plate alone. And whatever he gives you at the dish is a bonus. And so I thought, Kansas was one of my favorite teams to watch all year, but I thought maybe Arkansas could have been a one. I thought maybe they'd be a little ticked off and they'd come into Lawrence, Kansas. But credit to the Jayhawks. The Jayhawks end up advancing to that super regional. They beat Northeastern. We mentioned Northeastern led the nation in stolen bases this season, but Kansas beats them 6-3. Arkansas beats Missouri State 9-5. Arkansas, Missouri State played a really good game earlier in the season and in the regular season. That if anyone wants to go watch that, that was a great game. But and Arkansas and Missouri State played another really good game too. That was a really good game that they played on Friday. But Arkansas ends up coming out victorious. Northeastern then knocks out Missouri State, and Kansas beats Arkansas 5-3. Arkansas on Sunday, backs against the wall, beats Northeastern in a really good game. Northeastern, credit to them, they played a really they put up a really good fight to another 4 seed that deserves a lot of love. But Arkansas beats them 10-9, and then in Game 6, Kansas beats Arkansas 13-10. Woo Pig Sooie no longer in the tournament. Jayhawks moving on, and then our last regional. I mean, you want to talk about a home field advantage. I got to give a lot of love to Morgantown, West Virginia. What that community's been able to do, with their college baseball program. We mentioned earlier in the recording that, you know, uh, North Carolina was one of 2 teams to make it to a super regional in 3 consecutive years. West Virginia ends up being that second team. Steve Sabins, the young manager there, has done an excellent job at West Virginia. That community's really rallied around the baseball program. In many ways, the biggest blessing of UCLA getting knocked out, not that I'm hating on UCLA, but one of the biggest blessings of UCLA getting knocked out was that West Virginia, as the number 16 and final number 1 seed, so the 16 to 16 national seeds, but the final number 1 seed, if UCLA would have came out of that regional, it would have been West Virginia at UCLA. But because Cal Poly comes out of that regional, West Virginia gets to host the super regional, which I think was one of the biggest blessings, is what we get into with the super regionals, which is where we're going to start our super regional coverage in just a second. I give a lot of credit to West Virginia, and I've heard a lot over the years. It's always been on my bucket list to go to Morgantown and watch a football game there and do the whole pepperoni rolls and moonshine thing that they got going on over there. Sounds like a blast. I would love to do one of these recordings live from Morgantown one day, not only for the football program but for the baseball program. I would love to take this show on the road and be able to highlight all these different places across the country, across the globe, and highlight all these beautiful sports. And Morgantown, West Virginia, they really showed out for their program, both in the regional and in the super regional. We had mentioned that Kentucky was one of the last 4 teams into the field. Again, going to continue to say that Mercer should have made the field. I think what the regional weekend proved was that Kentucky should have been in the field, and then NC State, who was not one of the last 4 teams in where Kentucky was, it should have probably been flipped. And then instead of NC State, it should have been Mercer. That's my opinion. Didn't happen that way. But I give a lot of credit to Kentucky. And I'm going to caveat Kentucky with when we get to our College World Series preview once we get through the Super Regionals. Um, and I guess I might as well just do it now. Look, I know there's a lot of SEC propaganda out there, especially for college football and college basketball. But you know what? In college baseball, the SEC propaganda is absolutely worth it. The SEC has won the College World Series. I have to fact check myself. I want to say it's the last like 4 or 5 years. Uh, Allow me to fact check myself. So most recent champions. So we're gonna run down the list here. LSU won it last year. Tennessee won it in 2024. LSU won it in 2023. Ole Miss won it in 2022. Mississippi State won in 2021. There was no College World Series in 2020. Rest in peace. And then Vanderbilt won it in 2019. And then we mentioned Oregon State beating Arkansas. Arkansas blew that game two. Oregon State ends up coming back, wins game two, wins game three. Oregon State wins it in 2018. Florida wins it in 2017. And then Coastal Carolina, again, shout out to Coastal Carolina. They were in the championship last year. I think a lot of people forget that they won the national championship in 2016. Um, anyways, the SEC has won, count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 consecutive College World Series, 7 of the last 8. And the one that they didn't win, Arkansas lost in the championship. And really, I mean, not to say that they should have won it, but I mean, they came about as close to winning something and not winning it as you could possibly come in any sport. So look, the SEC propaganda might be insufferable to a lot of people for a lot of these different sports, but it's absolutely justified in college baseball. The SEC is a gauntlet, and so I give credit where it's due. Kentucky, we came on here and we mentioned, hey, you know what? Kentucky hasn't won a series in 10 weekends in a row or something like that. And the argument that the committee made was, hey, they didn't get swept. You know what? Kentucky gave West Virginia everything that they could possibly handle. Kentucky goes in game one. It was a really good game one against Wake Forest. They beat them 6-5. West Virginia takes care of Binghamton 10-1. Wake Forest goes in, knocks out Binghamton 12-3. On the winner side of things, Kentucky beats West Virginia 11-9. West Virginia backs against the wall. Sunday, knock out Wake Forest 10-5. Same day, go in, beat Kentucky 11-9. They flip that. And then they go in, winner take all game 7 on Monday. And in a 10-inning masterpiece, West Virginia comes out victorious over Kentucky. That was an incredible game. I would encourage anyone to go watch the replay of that game if you have the chance. Let that game speak for itself. I give a lot of credit to Kentucky. They battled throughout that entire weekend, and probably in most other regionals, they probably would have had a chance to make it out of their regional, to be honest with you. And I give a lot of love to Tyler Bell as well. Tyler Bell will be a top draft pick. I'd say probably in the top 15, top 20 picks. And I give a lot of credit to him because he played a lot of these games, especially here with the reported torn labrum, which is remarkable. Even if it's not a torn labrum, he clearly wasn't 100%, but he gutted it out. So I give a lot of respect to him and to Kentucky for battling throughout that entire regional. Credit where it's due, but credit to the Mountaineers for coming out victorious, making it to the Super Regionals, which is where we're going to set up our Super Regional coverage. Super Regionals, for those of you who don't know, we'll go in. If the regionals is double elimination with 4 teams, as we've covered. So there's a maximum of 7 games that get played within each regional between these 4 teams, double elimination. And the way that it sets up is, a lot on Sunday, you got to win twice. to get to Monday. If you're in that loser side of the bracket, you've lost once. Um, Super regionals, it's a lot more, it's a lot simpler. It's a lot more cut and dry. It's a best of three, first to win 2 games between these two teams, and that's that. And you make it to Omaha. So we're gonna start things off with the Morgantown Regional because, as we mentioned, we started in words are difficult, chronological. We went 1 to 16, sets up our first super regional with the bookend 1 and 16, and we'll go down a list 2, 15, so on and so forth. So we're gonna start in the Morgantown Super Regional. Heading into this regional, uh, to be honest, I thought Cal Poly had a little bit of a shot. I thought West Virginia was going to come out victorious, but I'd be lying to you if I thought that West Virginia was going to come in and eviscerate them 12-2 and 17-1. Um, we mentioned pitch counts earlier. Credit where it's due to Steve Sabins and West Virginia. Chance and Cole went out there game one, and Chance and Cole goes in there, throws over 120 pitches. And I mean, credit where it's due. That regional was never really in question. Um, yeah, look, Cal Poly, I really thought that they would be able to at least compete a little bit, but West Virginia, that atmosphere, and you know what, it was an early start time too for both of those games, especially game one. Game one of that was smack Friday afternoon, Friday morning for us on the West Coast, Friday afternoon, Friday, in Morgantown. They had Rich Rod, they had Pat McAfee, they had the whole community out there. I mean, credit to West Virginia, in an era where everybody's trying to make a ton of money. They opened up their little grass area, little concourse, whatever it's called, and let people go in and watch for free. So again, I got a lot of respect for what they're doing in Morgantown, West Virginia, especially in this era of college sports. The way that they're doing it with the atmosphere that they've got out there. Um, I would encourage the people not only for this season with the College World Series, but moving forward. If you've never watched a West Virginia baseball game on TV, I would highly recommend it. It's an incredible atmosphere. It's a really tough place to play. And again, Steve Sabins, a ton of credit. Gavin Kelly, we mentioned him. We mentioned Vaughn Lackey played a game earlier in the year where Vaughn Lackey played every position except for pitcher. Gavin Kelly's played catcher. He's played at second base a lot this season. He can really swing the bat. Amani Guzman can fly on the bases. Chance and Cole, we mentioned Maxiel. Uh, you go down the list, even a guy like Dawson Montesa. They've got 3 really good starters that give them a chance against anybody in the country. And then that atmosphere, those fans that they've got, the way that they travel. Um, I give a ton of credit where it's due to West Virginia. Um, Carson Turnquist, we mentioned him earlier. His ERA jumped up a solid it went from in the threes to the fours because he got shellacked in game two. He didn't last very long. It came back and, Carson Turnquist was on a really great roll before that. And then he ran into a buzzsaw in West Virginia and his ERA went through the roof. But yeah, you go that top three that they've got, Max Yell coming off of Tommy John, with a 2.1 ERA, and then Chance and Cole, and both of these guys have gone, over 90 innings. Well, Max Yell's thrown exactly 90 innings. Chance and Cole's got 94 and 2/3. Almost identical stat lines. It's almost remarkable. Chance and Cole's got 106 strikeouts, 30 walks. Max Yell's got 25 walks and 105 strikeouts. Maxiell's ERA's 2.10. Chance and Cole's got a 2.85 ERA. They've both started 17 games a pop. They both got one complete game, about as consistent as it gets. We mentioned Dawson Montesa earlier. And then even a guy like Ian Korn, who only, he's giving you 70 and a third out of the bullpen. And you go down the list, they got a really good ball club. Uh, and when we get to our Omaha, preview and they're going to be a big factor in that. And I'll be very interested to see, not to get ahead of ourselves. I will be interested to see, given that this will be West Virginia's first trip to Omaha. I'm expecting a lot of those West Virginia folk to travel out to Omaha and make that an atmosphere. West Virginia's going to be a tough out. They really will. It's gonna be a tough team to play, regardless of who has to play them on that side of the bracket and how it shakes out. But yeah, they took care of Cal Poly, no problem. I mean, just to put it in perspective, they played 2 games and the aggregate was 29-3. So, credit to Cal Poly for making it out of the UCLA regional without even having to play UCLA, mind you. Um, Always happy to spread some Big West propaganda, but we mentioned earlier the best teams don't always win. We also mentioned that sometimes the draws work out differently, where UC Santa Barbara had to play probably one of the 3 best teams in the country, 5, 6 best teams in the country, wherever you want to rank them in Texas. And then, UC Santa Barbara doesn't make it to the super regional. Cal Poly does. But throughout the body of work of the season, I would take UC Santa Barbara over Cal Poly 10 times out of 10. It's just the way that it shakes out that Cal Poly made it to the super regional and UC Santa Barbara did not. But West Virginia goes in, leaves no doubt. Moving on to the Lawrence Super Regional, we mentioned earlier that Kansas was one of my favorite teams to watch. I've said this ad nauseum that Georgia Tech was one of my favorite teams to watch all season. Um, and we gave a lot of love to that Atlanta Regional just because I thought that game 7 that they played on Monday in Atlanta was one of the best games I watched all year. Um, so I felt like, that was something I really wanted to highlight. There are a lot of other games that we really, I wish we had all, again, like I said, it's not the only time that we'll talk about these. You just have to kind of start somewhere. Um, but a lot of credit goes to Kansas for making it out of their regional with Arkansas, and then to Oklahoma for making it out of the Atlanta regional. So selfishly, I was really looking forward to a Georgia Tech Kansas super regional in Atlanta because that would have been arguably 2 of my, if not my 2 favorite teams all year, especially in the power conferences, quote unquote. And I used that with big quotation marks because it's a different rant for a different day. With the whole power conference and mid-major bullshit, we could talk about that for hours. But heading into this regional, this was probably the one regional that I'll happily admit that I got wrong, and I should have known that I would get it wrong because, momentum's a motherfucker. And the way that Oklahoma, I think maybe just being a little salty that Georgia Tech wasn't there, and because I had a little bit of a soft spot for this Kansas squad, I was kind of pulling for Kansas a little bit. So I won't lie, in my predictions, I picked Kansas, but Oklahoma doing what they did to Kansas, really beating the doors off of them twice. Oklahoma just rode the momentum from Atlanta, and they carried that over. We mentioned Dayton LaChance earlier. I think now is a perfect time to kind of go in and just kind of give this guy some love behind the plate as a catcher and what he's done at the dish. We mentioned first 31 games of the season, Dayton LaChance did not hit a single home run. He's played 57 games as of today. So you do the math, 26 games. He's hit 14 home runs in 26 games without hitting a home run in the first 31. Desan Harris, we mentioned him earlier. Really like watching him play. He hits a little bit further down in the order, but he's a speedster. He gets on base. He's got the highest batting average on the team. He's got 18 stolen bases on the year. Camden Johnson's a really good player. Jackson Willits. You go down the list. These are some really good players that they've got. We mentioned Skip Johnson's done a great job as well. Um, and you know what? Their pitching staff has held up better than I anticipated. Um, in the postseason. Not that it's a bad pitching staff by any means, um, but they really took care of Kansas. Kansas scored 3 runs in 2 games, similar to Cal Poly. Where it was 29-3 on aggregate. Oklahoma beat them 8-1 and 13-2. That's a 21-3 on aggregate. Oklahoma rightfully moves on to the College World Series, riding that momentum train from Atlanta all the way to Omaha. And then we're going to move on to the Athens Super Regional. I mean, if anyone out there has not watched either of these 2 games, or even if you don't want to watch the full game of both, do yourself a favor and watch the highlights. This was probably the best 2-0 sweep you could possibly watch in any sport. I mean, this was, this super regional was breathtaking. Honestly, I don't even think I could do it justice. I would just encourage people to go watch the highlights. Georgia goes in game one and this absolutely cracked out super regional that they had. Just to put it in perspective, Georgia goes in game one. Georgia beats them 13-12. But that doesn't even really do it justice of how that game played out. It was just back and forth, topsy turvy all the way throughout. You couldn't ask for a better game if you tried. June 6th was a remarkable day, and June 7th was equally as great. Um, yeah, Georgia goes in. Credit to them. Mississippi State puts up a 6 spot in the second inning. They put up another run in the fourth. They go up 7-0. Georgia comes in the bottom of the fourth. Daniel Jackson, our guy here at the Unfiltered Report, hits a solo homer. They get another homer from my guy, Mr. Lujo. Great player as well. You go up and down this Georgia lineup. They got a bunch of dudes in that lineup that should be drafted very, very, you know, handsomely, if you will. They should get taken pretty high up. Georgia comes in. Then in the bottom of the fifth, they put up another 4 runs, and all of a sudden, Georgia goes up 9-7. Mississippi State comes in the top of the sixth, hits 2 homers, ties it up 9-9. Our guy, Mr. Lujo, goes yard again in the bottom of the sixth. They go up 10-9. Mississippi State hits a homer in the top of the seventh to tie it up 10-10. Ace Reese in the top of the eighth. Ace Reese is another guy for you MLB draft folk out there to keep an eye out on. He gives them the lead 11-10. And then on a hit by pitch, Mississippi State adds another run to their lead, 12-10. And then my guy, Mr. O'Shaughnessy over here, hits a 3-run bomb in the bottom of the eighth, and Georgia holds on. Georgia wins 13-10. And then if that wasn't enough for you, game two, they go in and Georgia walks them off in extra innings, 11-9. or not walks him off, but takes the lead in the top of the 10th and then hangs on. I give some love to Mississippi State. We mentioned them earlier. I give some love to Jacob Parker as well. Jacob Parker's brother got drafted by the Blue Jays in the first round last year. Jacob Parker decides to go to college while his brother's in the minor leagues. He had a really good year. He had a really good series against Georgia. He went yard a couple of times on that game two that they played. But yeah, as a freshman, Jacob Parker gives you 18 homers and 62 RBIs, hitting 339. Ace Reese, we mentioned him. He'll be in the draft. 24 homers, 74 RBIs. Uh, you know, with a 336 average. My guy, Vitas Valanciunas, I give a lot of credit to him. And then Thomas Valanciunas on the mound. Thomas Valanciunas is a guy to keep an eye out for. 97 and two-thirds innings this year, 134 strikeouts to 20 walks. Duke Stone as well. Both of these guys are sophomores. They'll be back. Maddox Miller's a very interesting freshman to keep an eye on as well. Only started one time, but he's a guy I think has the ability. If they choose, he could start moving forward. But yeah, I give a lot of credit to Mississippi State. I mean, they gave Georgia, who I mentioned, I had them in Georgia Tech on a collision course. Mississippi State gave Georgia all they could handle in both of those games. And, Mississippi State, in many ways, were unfortunate to not get a game three out of that because you couldn't have played two closer games, especially against Georgia, than what they gave. But, I mean, it was a breathtaking two games. I would encourage people out there to go watch the highlights. It felt like every other hitter, the ball was going over the fence out there in Athens. It felt like the ball was just jumping off the bat and flying all over the place. Um, but Georgia Tech didn't make it past the regional. I feel at least a little bit, more relieved than that. That not that I could give a stuff about the Georgia Bulldogs, but you know what? Credit to them. They move on. We could go down the list again. Luho, Trey Phelps, Daniel Jackson. I mean, we could be here for hours. I mean, the whole lineup's incredible. Um, I give a lot of credit where it's due to the Georgia Bulldogs and Wes Johnson, like we mentioned earlier. Then we move on to the Auburn Super Regional. We mentioned that Milwaukee, similar to what Little Rock did to LSU last year. Milwaukee gave them all they could handle. But unlike LSU last year, these Tigers out of Auburn, Alabama, couldn't make it out of the Auburn regional against Ole Miss. We mentioned Ole Miss made it out of the Lincoln, Nebraska regional. Uh, Cade Townsend's a guy to keep an eye on for the draft, and he didn't even pitch. I mean, he's their third guy at this point. Um, they didn't need him. Ole Miss went in, beat Auburn twice. Look, both games were competitive baseball games, similar to Georgia and Mississippi State. On the flip side, Auburn probably will feel that, they could have at least taken one of those two games and at least forced the game three. But we mentioned Auburn earlier. They got a lot of young players. They will be back next year. There's not a doubt in my mind about that. We could go down the list with Auburn. I give them a ton of credit. We'll see, with the transfer portal and whatnot, how that shakes up. Which again, shout out, we got to do a college basketball transfer portal episode as well. That's something we forgot at the beginning. Been meaning to do that for a long time. Especially now that the NBA draft field is set with the combine having finished, which again, we got to recap the combine. That's entirely my bad on that. But, Auburn's got a really young team. They got a lot of freshmen and sophomores. And you go down the list, whether it's, Chase Freilich, Bub Terrell, Mason McCrane, Brandon McCrane, the one quote unquote upperclassman, if you will, Eric Guevara is a really fun player to watch as well. Christopher Rembert, Ethan Bingaman. I mean, you go down the list, it's a really, really good young team. And then on the mound, too, a bunch of sophomores and freshmen, Jackson Sanders, Alex Petrovich, Jake Marciano, Andreas Alvarez. All four of these guys, mind you, incredible on the mound. Marciano and Alvarez both over 100 strikeouts. Sanders and Petrovich not far behind them with 96 and 92 apiece. All of them with ERAs in the threes, and they're all sophomores. Um, they got a couple of dudes in the bullpen that pitch pretty well for them too. You go down the list, a guy like Ryan Hetzler, LJ Cormier. I give a lot of credit to Auburn. If they're able to keep all these guys together, they were the 4 seed this year. They'll only be better next year. I would definitely keep an eye on the Auburn Tigers if they're able to keep all these guys together and keep them from transferring out. Auburn's going to be as good as anybody next year. Obviously, don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but they got a really, really good young team down there in Auburn. So even though they didn't make it to Omaha, in many ways, the sky's not falling for them. They will definitely be back as well. Moving on to the Chapel Hill Super Regional. In this Chapel Hill Super Regional, again, I would encourage anyone who hasn't watched the games or the highlights to go in and do so. USC goes in game one, beats North Carolina 9-5. Uh, I didn't even mention in the Athens Super Regional, I had picked Georgia, and then in the Auburn Super Regional, I thought that one similar to Lawrence, Kansas. I thought that one was going to be tough to call. I thought maybe Auburn could pull it through, but momentum with Ole Miss similar to Oklahoma. Ole Miss rode that momentum train. And then, that takes us to the Chapel Hill Regional. To me, this was the hardest regional to pick heading into the Super Regionals. I tossed and turned trying to figure out who I would take. Uh, you know, I mean, I think I went back and forth with it at least 100, 150 times. Um, it really could have gone either way. And the way that this series played out, it was only fitting that this was really not to get ahead of ourselves, but I mean, this was the only series that got a third game, and boy, did that third game deliver. Um, I would just encourage people to go watch the bottom of the ninth with North Carolina and USC. USC was up 3-2. UNC ties it, and then similar to what happened with Arkansas and the College World Series Game 2 final against Oregon State. The only difference being that Arkansas was up and Arkansas would have won, and Arkansas would have won the College World Series. In this instance, USC would have set this game to extra innings, but a similar play just on the other side of the diamond. And then, a pitch later, North Carolina walks them off after blanking them in game two. It was an incredible series. It's a shame that one of those two teams had to lose. Like I said, it was the hardest series for me to predict. And I guess true to form, it was the only series that went a third game. So again, you're never going to bat 1,000. Probably, hitting about 500 up until this. And then, this was a coin flip to me. I don't even really feel like I would deserve credit in saying I took North Carolina. So I would just say, I mean, I think I did have. I will say I did have the Tar Heels, but it wasn't a very convincing. I probably would have flip flopped that. So I don't want to take too much credit for that. I mean, I never want to take credit really at all. But I just thought that was a really tough super regional to predict. But again, North Carolina's a really good baseball team. They're a well-rounded ball club. I mentioned Steve Forbes earlier. It's a tough break for USC being so close to making it to Omaha. But they have nothing to be ashamed of. It was a great run for them. Ironically, Mason Edwards pitched game two, and that was the game that was the game they played the worst in. He didn't really have a great outing. But USC as a whole really gave the Tar Heels everything that they could handle. So credit where it's due to the Tar Heels and to the Trojans for an incredible 3-game series. And then that takes us to the Austin Super Regional between Oregon and Texas. This one was pretty cut and dry for me. I didn't see Oregon being able to go in there and beat Texas. I thought if Texas was going to be able to get past Santa Barbara, it didn't matter who they were going to play in the Super Regional, whether it was Oregon, Oregon State, Wazoo, whoever. I thought Santa Barbara was going to be the toughest opponent that they were going to face to get to Omaha, and that ended up ringing true. It ended up being Oregon, and Texas ended up beating them, ended up sweeping them. The second game was a lot closer than the first game, but it was really never in doubt to me that Texas was going to make it to Omaha, especially after they made it out of the regional. Credit to Oregon again. Oregon's got a really good ball club. They'll be around again next year. They're not going anywhere. But Texas, big credit to them, knocking out the Ducks and sweeping them in the manner that they did. Um, and then that takes us to the Tuscaloosa Super Regional. We mentioned that there were two 4 seeds that made it, and there were a couple other 4 seeds that really, gave those regionals a run for their money. St. Mary's beating UCLA twice. Milwaukee gave Auburn all they could handle. Northeastern put up a pretty good showing. St. John's went into Tallahassee, but I didn't think that they would have enough juice to beat Alabama. I know we kind of came in here and said Oklahoma State might come out of that regional, but once Alabama came out of the regional, I felt pretty confident that Bama was going to make it out of the super regional. And you know what? This is an Alabama team that is about as underrated of a 7 seed as you can really get. Um, in the sense that maybe they haven't gotten as much buzz as some of these other teams. But we mentioned Justin LeBron, but they're much more than just Justin LeBron. They got some really good players. Uh, at Alabama, both on the mound and at the plate and in the field. Brady Neal, again, you're the catcher, is another catcher that we haven't mentioned. Bryce Fowler's been a really good player. They're just a rock solid team. Taylor Fay to me, the ERA is a bit less misleading. To me, he's a guy I would keep an eye out in MLB circles. I would ignore that 4.37 ERA. To me, he's a really impressive pitcher. Zane Adams and Miles Upchurch as well. Miles Upchurch is a freshman, by the way, is definitely a guy to keep an eye on. He'll have to limit the walks moving forward, but when you hold hitters to 198 batting average and 70 and 2/3, I don't, we can work on that. So they got a really good trio of starters that are going to give Alabama a chance against whoever they play uh, in the College World Series. However, the bracket shakes out. I mean, obviously, the bracket is set, but however, the winner bracket and the losers bracket, because again, not to get ahead of ourselves, but the College World Series is broken up in the same way that the regionals are, where it's two sides of the bracket of 4 teams, double elimination, similar deal. But yeah, I give a lot of credit to Alabama. They can really pitch the crap out of the baseball. Justin LeBron to me, again, I mentioned him. Again, it's not a player comparison, but just a player parallel between him and Braden Montgomery. I would not be surprised if Justin LeBron ends up ironically, I could see him getting drafted 17th overall, smack dab on the dot, and he'll be promoted to the big league soon after. And teams will kick themselves and say, why didn't we draft that guy a little bit earlier? I got high hopes for Justin LeBron moving forward. Best LeBron in sports, if you ask me. But yeah, Alabama really faced no adversity in that super regional. St. John's really didn't have much of a chance. I mean, we mentioned Mexico, South Africa earlier. I mean, this was pretty similar to that. I mean, South Africa had no chance, and St. John's had no chance. We mentioned Cal Poly, West Virginia. I mean, these guys have no chance either. It's sad to say, but you know what? It's a credit for St. John's that they made it to the super regional. but they didn't have enough juice to beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa. And this is a pretty cut and dry. Again, not to keep banging the aggregate drum here, but Alabama beats them 8-0 and then 7-2, 15-2 on aggregate in 2 games. Pretty cut and dry. And then our last super regional, we mentioned Troy, we mentioned Little Rock. A shout out to both. Um, this is I want to give some love to Troy further in depth because we kind of zoomed past them a little bit earlier. We mentioned Jimmy Janicki. Jimmy Janicki behind the plate as a sophomore is a guy to keep an eye on. For those of you that take a listen to this, Jimmy Janicki is going to be a big. He's a big league ball player in my opinion. 19 homers, 85 RBIs with a 341 batting average. Uh, Only struck out 41 times on the season. Um, he's a guy to keep an eye on for sure, but it's beyond him. Aaron, I might butcher his name, Piasecki. He's a really good player in right field. Stephen Meyer, Drew Nelson, Josh Pine. You go down the list. It's a really good team. And they got a couple of good arms too. I really enjoyed watching Hayden Smith, Tommy Egan, Benjamin Stubbs. Troy might be a small name to the national people and people that don't really that aren't tuned in or whatever, but Troy's a really good team. This is not your run of the mill Cinderella. I mean, this is a really good baseball team, and they got as good a shot, as anybody in this College World Series field. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how they do. They look not to keep banging the same drum, but there was really no adversity in this. Troy got to host this regional, um, and they took care of Little Rock. They really did. 12-2 in game one, 7-2 game two. That's a 19-4 on aggregate in 2 games, which is a similar theme throughout the super regionals. Really, the only super regional. There were only, in my opinion, there were only two super regionals. Well, three. There were three super regionals that were really competitive. Obviously, we mentioned USC, North Carolina. We mentioned Georgia, Mississippi State, and then Ole Miss, Auburn. Those are really the only three competitive series. Every other series was pretty much cut and dry, done and dusted. Maybe Texas, Oregon game two, but not even. I mean, Troy took care of Little Rock, no problem. Alabama took care of St. John's. Texas took care of Oregon. Oklahoma took care of Kansas, and then West Virginia beat the brakes out of Cal Poly. This super regionals, maybe outside of especially the Athens Super Regional and the Chapel Hill Super Regional, and then giving some love to the Auburn Super Regional as well, which I would like to go back actually and give some love to Ole Miss because we didn't really do that. So I'd like to go back real quick retroactively. I just mentioned that Cade Townsend didn't even start, and he's probably the MLB draft guy, if you will. That's probably the highest rated. But look, Taylor Rabe's legit. Hunter Elliott has done really well in the postseason as well. Listen, Taylor Rabe's a really good pitcher too. I think he's a guy I would definitely keep an eye on. Only 11 walks in 70 and a third innings to 98 strikeouts. Cade Townsend to me, they didn't even need him last weekend. He didn't even need to pitch. I think you'll see him in Omaha this weekend. Not to get ahead of ourselves. Assuming that Ole Miss don't go 2-out in Omaha, I think there's a good chance you'll see all three of those guys, Elliott, Townsend, and Taylor Rabe. And, then at the plate too, Judd Udemark, one of the cooler names in the sport, Tristan Becerra, Will Furnace, Hayden Federico, Dominique Decker, Austin Foley. I mean, you go down the list, they got some pretty good players. This is not, obviously they weren't a national seed, but this is not, this, the, this is not some, Joe Schmo. I mean, this is Ole Miss. This is a really good baseball team. They might have been a 2 seed in the Lincoln Regional, but I mean, that's just a number. and in ranking. This is as good a baseball team as any. And they proved that in the last 2 weekends that they're legit. And we mentioned, look, the SEC is the real deal, especially when it comes to baseball. And all of which is to say, we're going to set up our College World Series bracket. There are two sides to the bracket. The first side of the bracket, in about uh, what's my math? 6 hours and 24 minutes or so, give or take, from first pitch. We're gonna get West Virginia and Troy, which I'll just say right off the bat, I love that that's a matchup. Uh, I can't wait to watch that. I honestly would hate to even have to pick between one of those two. I think that's going to be a spectacular game. I could really see it going either way. Um, Two of my favorite teams to watch all year, like I mentioned, Georgia Tech, Georgia, Mercer, Texas, Kansas, Troy, West Virginia. These have been some of my favorite teams to watch throughout the year. Even North Carolina with their arms, even though obviously I didn't pick them to come out of the regional, but these are some of my favorite teams that I've enjoyed watching all year. So look, West Virginia, Troy is a perfect way to start the College World Series in Omaha, 11 p.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, uh, which is perfect because it's going to run congruently with Canada and Bosnia Herzegovina. And then the second game in that bracket, which is also going to be later today, is going to be 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be North Carolina and Ole Miss, which is another fantastic game. And then that will most likely be great because you'll get about 2 hours of that leading in to USA Paraguay at 6 p.m. And then you can do a little split screen action if you want. And then all the other actions can be going on, MLB and the lot. So it's going to be, look, for the sports fans out there, the sports degenerates. I mean, this is the perfect fucking time. I mean, you got all this shit going on. Uh, I'm fucking fired up in case you couldn't notice. Um, so that's one side of the bracket. You've got Friday, which is today, West Virginia and Troy, and then North Carolina and Ole Miss. Both of those setting the stage, and then Saturday, the other half of the bracket. We mentioned the SEC. Look, the SEC gets a lot of propaganda, and a lot of it is propaganda. But this is justifiable propaganda because you look at the second side of the bracket, and you're guaranteed to get a team from the SEC in the championship game because all four of these teams are from the SEC. Now, the counter argument to that would be that the SEC is getting the most seats at the table, so they're going to get the most cracks at it. I would agree with that as well. But, I think in this case, even if that is true, the SEC is king in college baseball. It's not necessarily the case that in the way that it's portrayed to the extent in college football and basketball, which we'll get to that in due time. But at least when it comes to college baseball, I think the beauty of college baseball is that it's the perfect example of two things can be true at once. You can have a team like Troy, and you can have a team like Troy that can absolutely hang with the other seven teams in this field. And, it's not like Troy's some like, Cinderella story. I mean, Troy's a legitimate fucking baseball team. I mean, those dudes have as good a chance as anybody to make a run. We mentioned again, Coastal Carolina won it in 2016. They made it to the championship and lost to LSU last year. Um, you know, Troy is not some, Division 3 miracle. I mean, this is a good ball club. They might have been one of the last teams into the field, but that's just because of the selection committee. I mean, they've proven that they belong. This is not some fluky run, that they've gone on. I think, to be honest with you, had Little Rock beaten Troy, that would have been a fluky Cinderella run, and I would have came in and said, "Look, Little Rock, it's a cool story, but they're not built like that." Whereas Troy, on the other hand, Troy, in my opinion, is built like that. and they're going to have every bit of an ability to make it out of their side of the bracket, which again is, not to make it all conference affiliated, but you've got Troy coming out of the Fun Belt, um, and then you've got ACC, you've got Big 12, and then you've got SEC. So you've got five SEC teams. You've got Troy from the Sun Belt, the Fun Belt, as we like to say. Um, Again, West Virginia in the Big 12, and then North Carolina in the ACC. And then we move on to the other half of the bracket on Saturday, 12 o'clock p.m. on the West Coast, 3 p.m. on the East Coast on ESPN. You're going to have Alabama and Oklahoma. And then what I think is the best matchup of these opening round matchups, just in terms of on paper talent. Like if Troy, West Virginia is my favorite matchup, as in I hope one of those two teams makes a run. Georgia and Texas, for anyone out there who hasn't watched much college baseball this season and you're looking to pick a game to get into college baseball, not only for this year, but moving forward, that would be the game I would tell you to watch. If you're not like me, of course, where I love the Troys of the world. Like I would recommend you to watch all four of them. To be honest with you, I think all four of these opening round matchups are going to be spectacular. I think North Carolina Ole Miss actually has the potential to be the best matchup out of the four of them, and then Alabama Oklahoma to me. I mean that's a coin flip and a half. I mean you could run that simulation 100 times and they'd probably split 50-50 or 51-49. But yeah, Georgia, Texas to me, I mean, those are two heavyweights. I mean, we said it throughout this recording and the previous one, and we'll continue to say it. I mean, I thought it would be, instead of Oklahoma, I thought it would be Georgia Tech. And I thought those two teams would be on a collision course. And that if Texas could make it past Santa Barbara, Texas would be in that party. Georgia Tech's not here. Oklahoma's here. Listen, Oklahoma and Alabama are not going to roll over either. Those two have as good a chance to make it out as Georgia and Texas do. Um, but if you were going to be looking to project this, I would project that whoever makes it out of that side of the bracket between those four SEC teams, I think would be the favorite. I think Georgia and Texas, especially to me, I think not again, I should caveat. I think the two favorites to me, I think it's Georgia and Texas. I think whichever of those two is able to make it out of that side of the bracket, those two I would have favored over Alabama and Oklahoma. But the caveat again is that Alabama and Oklahoma are not some Cinderella underdog. Like, if Alabama or Oklahoma makes it to the championship game, you're not gonna I mean, you might hear it from other places, but for me, you're not gonna hear me come on here and say, "Oh my God, I can't believe they made it to the final." No, I mean, I think any of these eight teams, I will not be surprised if they make a run. I think all eight of them are incredibly talented baseball teams. I think it's an incredibly balanced field. I don't think there are any pretenders in this field. I think are these the eight best baseball teams in the country? Perhaps not, but are they eight balanced baseball teams that all have a good shot at making a run in Omaha? Yes, I do believe that. But I do think that if I were to break it down, I think Georgia and Texas, I think whoever makes it out of that to me is the national champion. Previewing that, I said it would be a collision course between Georgia and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's not there, so if I had to pick a champion, I'm taking Georgia to win it all. But I think it could very well be Texas. It could very well be Alabama or Oklahoma coming out of that side of the bracket, and I wouldn't be surprised any which way. Oklahoma, we mentioned 2 weekends in a row, they've been playing incredible baseball, and if they're able to carry that momentum, nobody on either side of the bracket is going to want to play them. I mentioned Alabama. I think Alabama Oklahoma is going to be tremendous. I think that I'll be interested to see who Alabama throws out on the mound tomorrow night, yeah, tomorrow night being it Saturday, so technically tomorrow night. Um, I think that contrast between Alabama's pitching staff and Oklahoma's ability to hit at the plate, that'll be a fun contrast. But then I think the determining factor in that is going to be who performs better between Oklahoma's pitching staff and Alabama's lineup. And then, with Georgia and Texas, I mean, I think I'll be interested to see how Texas breaks down their starters as well. When does a guy like Dylan Volantis get the ball? Do you give him the ball game one against Georgia? Do you save him for game two, either in a winner's bracket game or an elimination game? It's going to be a similar theme. West Virginia. Are they going to go with Chance and Cole against Troy tomorrow morning? We could go down the list. With Ole Miss, are they going to go with Elliott? Are they going to go with Rabe game two? How's that going to shake out? I think all four of these are complete toss ups. I mean, we could run this simulation a million times, and I know people always, I know the people that I love most. Sometimes, we all have to give each other a hard time sometimes, and I know one of the things where I happily admit it's a flaw of mine is, I wish I could pick everybody, and it's not it's just one of those things where sometimes in making predictions you lose sight of the actual full story, and that's what I like to do really more than anything is try to paint a picture as best I can. And the predictions are secondary. You hit some, you miss some. But if I had to do my best to run through this, West Virginia, Troy. I'm really rooting for Troy. You know me. I love the. If you know me, if you don't, I love the little guy. I love the, and not that the Troy, again, not that Troy's a little guy, but in the media sense of how it's covered. So I'm always going to root for the underdog. I hope Troy wins the whole thing, and I hope Troy are national champions. And if it's not Troy, I would be upset with West Virginia. We spread a lot of Morgantown propaganda, which I never thought in a million years I would come on here and spread Morgantown propaganda, but that's how life plays out. Um, but I think on that side of the bracket, I mentioned earlier that there are two teams that made it to super regionals in 3 consecutive years. They both were able to make it out of the super regionals and make it to Omaha, West Virginia, North Carolina. I think it'll be one of those two teams on that side of the bracket. And you know what? I might come to regret this, but I'm going to take West Virginia to go to the championship game. I mean, I don't have any statistical proof on this, so I could just be talking out of my ass. But I have a feeling that there are going to be a lot of West Virginia people out there in Omaha. They're gonna make that atmosphere really really tough. I think West Virginia's got the pitching to be able to hold up. Look, I think North Carolina Ole Miss is a complete coin flip. I don't want to sleep on the Rebels either. I mean, absolutely, they could be, one of those teams. I mean, they're playing really great baseball, and like we mentioned, they got, when you get to this part of the tournament, especially anytime that you've got the ability to trot out three guys that can start and eat innings and give you a chance to win, you take that. And I think all four of those teams on that side of the bracket, they all have solid pitching staffs. They've got great lineups. I think I can make the case for all four of them. But if I had to make a prediction, I would have West Virginia, North Carolina. I think that'll go to a game seven, and then I think West Virginia come out on top over North Carolina. But if you ask me the same question in 10 hours, I might change my mind. And I might have Troy going all the way. I'm pumping. I'm gonna be pumping all kinds of Troy propaganda regardless. So I hope Troy make it through. Uh, so that'll be the caveat that I'm rooting for Troy, and I think Troy got a real shot. So I'm rocking with the Troy Trojans. We'll see what happens. But then on the other side of the bracket, I mentioned, I think I mean, you can make the case for any of these, but I think you're going to get a game seven between Georgia and Texas. I think Alabama will beat Oklahoma. Look, Oklahoma's on a great run right now, but I would take Alabama in that matchup. I'll take Georgia. I think, ironically, maybe biasly, I like the way that it sets up where we get a little Oklahoma Texas action in an elimination game, which I would eat that shit up. I think Texas will knock out Oklahoma, and then you'll get Georgia and Alabama. Georgia will beat Alabama. Texas will beat Alabama, and then Texas will beat Georgia, and you'll get a game seven. Georgia will beat Texas. And I've got the winner of Georgia Texas winning the national championship if I had to make a prediction. So if you put a gun to my head at the moment at fuck 4:51 in the morning, holy smokes. So again, take it for a grain of salt, but I would have Georgia and West Virginia if you put a gun to my head. But that's subject to change, and I would be definitely monitoring all those games. And for those of you out there that are into, we're gonna talk about, I mean, I shouldn't get ahead of myself because it's going to be a big part of our future recording, with the whole Texas Tech thing. But for those of you out there that are into betting and all that, I think this would be a great live betting weekend where maybe you let a couple of innings go by, and then you hop in while it's there. But if you wanted my 2 cents before the tournament, I think Georgia or Texas out of that side of the bracket, and then that team will be the champion. I said before the tournament, I had Georgia and Georgia Tech on a collision crash course, and the winner of that was going to win the whole thing. Georgia Tech's not here. I'm going to take Georgia, and I'm going to ride with that as my prediction. But I'm rooting for West Virginia and Troy uh, to make a run. I hope one of those two teams is able to win it. So that'll be my big caveat, and all that is and we could be here all night talking about it. But more than anything, beyond the predictions, I hope one of the things I really hope with this recording is that while we have this World Cup fever and we're going to come in throughout the next 38 days and recap each day and preview the next other World Cup. I hope you'll join us here at the Unfiltered Report beyond the World Cup, with the College World Series taking place um, right here, starting in a couple of hours here, and then the championship series will begin. Game one of the championship would be Saturday, June 20th, Sunday, June 21st, and Monday, June 22nd. So to put that in perspective, the NBA Finals, if there's a game seven, would be Friday, June 19th. If there's a game seven, which, not to get ahead of myself, but I think there's a good chance we might have one. Uh, I think we are going to get a game seven in that. Maybe I'm wrong. But again, stay tuned for all the stuff we've got. We're going to come in here. I'm going to do my part as best I can to come in here after these games take place and recap them the same way that we would do the World Cup. So I'm gonna hold myself to that, and I hope the people out there hold me to it. If I don't do it, and they say, "Man, what the fuck you doing? You're full of crap," I might say, "You know what?" Uh, so I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope to recap all these games as they happen, and more than anything, just enjoy the action for what it is. I don't really care. I just want good games at the end of the day. I know that contradicts the fact that I said I would be rooting for Troy or West Virginia, but at the end of the day, I don't really have a horse in the race either. I just want good baseball. I want everyone to enjoy it. Um, so I am looking forward to it, and I hope that you'll all join us here at the Unfiltered Report for our college baseball, college World Series coverage throughout the World Series as it plays out. In addition, again, we've got some long overdue MLB conversations, um, both on the field and off. As far as some new stadium stuff and whatnot to keep an eye out for. We haven't done one of those in a while with the stadium conversations, so keep an eye out for that as well. Um, and then I can never spread enough Christopher Sanchez propaganda on here. I'll be happy to do that. I know a lot of people, a lot of the stars of the Unfiltered Report are are all aboard the Michael Olise train, and I think Christopher Sanchez and Michael Olise, they play different sports, but I think there are a lot of similarities there. Um, what Christopher Sanchez did in the month of May, we haven't talked about on here, but absolutely incredible. And then, even a guy like Jacob Mizorowski, what he was able to do as well in the month of May, and some of these other starters. I mean, it's a great time to be a Major League Baseball fan. It's a great time to be a baseball fan and loving the game. So I hope you'll join us. As we we'll continue. We haven't done an MLB conversation in a while, so stay tuned for that. Our MLB Farm System deep dive, MLB draft coverage. We still got to recap that ridiculous Game Five at Madison Square Garden between Game Four. I don't know why I keep mixing that up. Game Four between the Spurs and the Knicks, setting the stage, previewing Game Five. I keep flipping because the Hurricanes just won Game Five today. We have yet to really deep dive that series. I'll take full responsibility for that. But that's been an incredible Stanley Cup final so far between the Canes and the Golden Knights. And I'm fully expecting that to go seven as well. My pre-series prediction was Canes in seven, and I had the Spurs in seven. So I'm going to rock with both. Um, but, both of those series have been incredible in their own ways. Uh, and then both of those drafts are coming up. So we're gonna recap the combine, preview both drafts, recap both drafts, talk about both finals as well, preview both of those off seasons, talk about their off seasons. Before you know it, it's gonna be American football season. I mentioned earlier we want to start giving some love, to the WNBA, AUSL, PWHL, NWSL. Uh, just go down the line. I'm sure there's some sports I'm forgetting. I'd love to get some people on here to talk about some niche sports that I don't even really know much about, even like bass fishing or something like that, or NASCAR, Formula One, golf, sports that maybe I have surface level knowledge in as far as who's good and who's not. But I'd love to get some people on here that have that passion for it, and get them on here as well, and we can talk about all sorts of things and some non-sports stuff too. And just I look forward to talking to the people throughout the summer, not only the stars of the Unfiltered Report, but uh, you know, going to maybe public places, whether it's a watch party or whatever it is, and or outside the stadiums and or wherever it may be. Just try to talk to the people, get a feel for it, feel for what see how that plays out basically. But more or less, a lot to look forward to. Lot to look forward to here at the Unfiltered Report, and I hope you'll join all of us in our journey throughout this summer, and throughout beyond the summer. But hopefully this summer continues. It's only just begun. So cheers to a great summer, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to continue to say it. May y'all stay safe out there, stay healthy, take care of yourselves, sleep, hydrate, eat, um, enjoy your loved ones, and your company with them. Tell the people you love that you do love them. Give them a big hug. And I always like to say, any day above ground with breath in your body is a blessing. Uh, and we try to do the best we can to take advantage of that. And hopefully, from here on out, we can only continue to make good on what we want to do here at the Unfiltered Report. So cheers to all of it. Cheers to an incredible summer. And I appreciate everyone for taking the time to be a part of this. And I love you all. It's our thing. It's our family, baby. I love you guys. Uh, Cheers to the best to come.